In this demo, we'll take our local folder containing the doc project we've been working on and turn it into a Git repo that we have on GitHub. To start, we'll create an empty repository on GitHub. Then we'll be adding a config file to our local folder to make sure that Git will ignore our build folder for source control purposes. We don't need to retain version history for those files, just the source files that we're editing. Then we'll turn our local folder into a local Git repository by using a git initialize command. After that, we'll configure the local repo to be remotely connected to the GitHub repository we set up in our first step. Then we'll do an initial push from the local folder into the remote repo, which will push all of our source files up into GitHub. These steps are all one-time setup steps. The regular workflow for making changes and getting them committed will be a little different and a little easier. So if you start getting worried by what you see here, fret not and stay tuned. We'll start the process to get our doc code into a GitHub repo right here on the GitHub website after we've logged in. I'll click the button to create a new repository and give it a name of Coding with Kids. There are a couple of other options here that I can simply ignore for now. I'll press the green button to finish the repository creation, and then I see some helpful information that can get me rolling. I'm going to grab the HTTPS URL for this repo and copy it for use in just a sec. But note that we'll basically be following the steps for creating a new repository from the command line. Let's go into VS Code now for our doc project and pick up there. In VS Code, I want to add a gitignore file so that our build folder contents, which amounts to quite a few files, will not be part of what lives in our Git repository. To do that, I'll add a new file called .gitignore to the root directory for the project. This is a special file that Git will look at as it monitors the repository we'll create. Once I've created the file, I can simply add _build as the first and only line to the file to make sure that Git doesn't look at that directory for change monitoring and source control. Now that that's in place, I can initialize the Git repository for this directory. I could do that from the command line, but let's use the VS Code source control tab instead. When I click that tab, I see a note that no source control providers are set up for this directory yet. I can click the little Git icon to initialize the local repo. I get a very much oversized initialize window. My computer sometimes gets confused with the multiple monitors and their different resolutions. But all I need to do is click the initialize button. Since this is a brand new repo that we've just created, all of our existing files now show up as needing to be committed into the repo as new files. I'll type in a commit note of initial commit and then commit the changes. I see a note here about staged changes that I don't really need to worry about right now. Staging changes is beyond the scope of this course, but you might think of it like creating shelve sets in TFVC. Having completed the init and first commit, we now have a local Git repository, and the current state of all of our source code is now at a known point. All of this is so far still on our local machine. Now we need to connect to a remote repo and do a push. The integrated menu options in Git functionality do not currently support the two operations we need to do, so I'll open a terminal for this. We start by adding a remote origin link to the URL that GitHub gave us when we created the repo. Then we do a push with the -u flag to the master branch, and we see some objects being reviewed and written, which seems promising. The process completes, and we can pop back to our browser showing the repo we created earlier. If we refresh the page, we see that our code has been uploaded. Awesome! So now we have local code that we have pushed into a repo on GitHub. Let's get read the docs hooked up to it now.